Hello, and welcome to People of the Pod, brought to you by American Jewish Committee. Each week, we take you beyond the headlines to help you understand what they all mean for America, Israel, and the Jewish people. I'm your host, Manya Brashear-Pashman. Welcome to this live recording. Election season in Europe is in full force, including recent elections in France, the United Kingdom, and the European Parliament. American Jewish Committee's offices across Europe have closely followed the dramatic results across the continent. Joining us to share what these developments mean for Israel and the Jewish people is someone who has become a fairly regular guest thanks to her expertise, AJC Europe Managing Director Simone Rodan-Benzaquen. Simone, welcome back to People of the Pod.
Thank you very much, Manya. It's very good to be with you.
So let's start with the most recent election in France, which is home to the second largest diaspora Jewish community behind the United States. So President Emmanuel Macron surprised a lot of people by calling for a snap election after his party was pummeled by the far right in European Parliament elections. Why was a snap election his solution, and what was the outcome?
So the president has said that after the European parliamentary elections, which you indeed said have been a huge failure for his party, he only gained 17% of the French vote, while the far right gained 33%, that he wanted to use this occasion to give back the voice to the people and use it basically as a means to clarify the situation. Now, there has been a little bit of clarification. The one clarification I'd say is the fact that after the first round, where it became very clear that the far right is gaining more and more weight within the French public opinion and therefore possibly also in parliament, where it was expected that the far right would become the first party and possibly be able to have a government, the clarification was nevertheless that the majority of the country doesn't want the national rally, meaning the far right, to rule the country. It has also been a clarification because it has also showed that to some extent the National Front is probably not yet ready to rule, apart from the fact that a majority of the people don't believe it should be, because nearly 100 candidates were, as one could say, problematic. Some of them had had a criminal past. Some of them had made anti-Semitic, racist statements in the past. Some of them were truly not very competent, broke down in all of the interviews or the confrontations, not being able to respond to any of the questions. So that was, I'd say, one part of the clarification. The other part of the clarification, which is to some extent problematic and brings us to the situation we're in today, is the fact that France is now clearly split into, I'd say, three blocks: the far right, which is strong, the center, and the left. And so just to give you a little bit of an understanding what the results look like after the second round of the elections. So it gave what we call the NFP, basically an alliance of all of the left parties, the far left, the Socialist Party, the Greens, and the Communists, 182 seats in the 577-seat National Assembly. A majority is needed of 289 seats, so they only have, as the largest bloc, 182 seats. Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party has, again, despite the fact that they were expecting to win, only 143 seats, nevertheless gaining 50 seats compared to the previous election. And for President Macron's party, the results come as something probably of a relief, because they have 168 seats, down from the 250 seats it held in the outgoing parliament, but still far more than what people were expecting. So we now have basically three scenarios. We have theory a left bloc that doesn't have an absolute majority, that could be the ones, nevertheless, to try and find a coalition to rule the country. You could have something of a sort of a grand coalition, which would include the moderate left, the center, and the moderate right, But France is not really used to making coalitions. It's not how we work. It's not like in Israel. It's not like in Germany or other European countries. Or we could have a third option, again, one that we've not had previously in the Fifth Republic. It's called something like a technical government, as it was the case, for example, in Italy under the Draghi government.
So what do these results mean for the French Jewish community?
Now, first of all, I'd say that many Jews, after the second round of the elections, probably felt, just as much of the country, a sigh of relief. In between the two rounds, everybody was talking about the fact that whether the Nationals rally would have an absolute majority, we would have Prime Minister Bardella from the far right ruling the country, what it would mean. And that's not happening. So I think a majority of French Jews, again, just as a majority of French people, probably seem somewhat relieved. But I think it was very quickly gained by a sense of worry because of the presence of the far left and Ballot party in the left coalition that is now the largest part. And so many, many questions arise because we know that in that part of the coalition, there are very, very, very problematic elements, particularly with relations to Jews and anti-Semitism. They have really made sort of, anti-Israelism or even anti-Semitism a core part of the ideology. And I think more largely, I'd say, Jews, I think, are very, very uncomfortable. We were really, the Jewish question, if I may put it that way, was really at the center of this election. It was all day long about which party is anti-Semitic, which party isn't, who is trying to get the attention of the Jews. And so many people around us, around me, really had the impression that they were being instrumentalized in a very, very horrible manner. And I think the large feeling within the Jewish community is uncomfortable. They are afraid. And all of this also, particularly in a context where we have an explosion of anti-Semitism.
So are you saying that question of who is more anti-Semitic, the right, the left, was not actually, that question was not coming from the Jewish community, it was coming from another source? What were the origins of that question? And why is anti-Semitism the sin that is being instrumentalized?
So first of all, you have to understand that the far left party from Jean-Luc Mélenchon has really used the issue of Gaza and of the Palestinians as a weapon. It's not about the Palestinians. It's about, how can I call it, Palestinianism. It's really become sort of a cultural marker for that party, constantly being at the border of anti-Semitism. So you have for example, people within his party who considered that the October 7th terrorist attacks were not terrorist. You have those who say that it was actually resistance. You have those who denied that babies were killed. And the other side of the political spectrum, Marine Le Pen and and Bardella positioned themselves as basically the defenders, the protectors of the Jews, all while at the same time still having elements within her own party that were clearly problematic. The National Front also knows that this is the best way for them to become normalized, to become a regular party that can actually be taken seriously by large parts of the French society. So basically everybody was pulling at the Jews on all sides. And we all know that whenever you make the issue of anti-Semitism a political issue, basically a political football game or baseball game in the American context, it means that you're actually not serious about anti-Semitism. And the same can be said on the left. In particular, the far left always pretends not to be anti-Semitic, says, how is it even possible that anyone could believe they would be anti-Semitic, while they only believe that anti-Semitism only exists on the right and on the far right. So it's very problematic because, again, in the middle, there are actually Jewish citizens who the only thing they want is for everybody within the French society to take anti-Semitism seriously and to fight it collectively, knowing in particular that it's always the problem of society at large and should therefore be taken seriously by everybody.
I mean, it is well known, the history of anti-Semitism within France's far-right party. I mean, Jean-Marie Le Pen, Marine Le Pen's father, was repeatedly convicted for hate speech, Holocaust denial. And it does appear that his daughter, Marine Le Pen, has taken steps to distance her party from that history. She's expressed support for Israel. She's expressed support for France's Jewish community, as you said. Are you saying that it's really nothing more than a political strategy, a facade? Or do you think there is an authentic evolution of principles in her party that has some residual anti-Semitism from this long history?
First of all, it's better to have a party to say what they say than the opposite. Let's be very clear about that. It's better to have Marine Le Pen and Bardella say the things that they say, meaning expressing support for the Jewish community, expressing support for Israel, than the opposite, as her father used to say, who used to consider that the gas chambers were just a detail in history. But nevertheless, I spoke about the fact that Emmanuel Macron, in his decision to call for snap elections, has wanted to clarify things. And once the focus came back to actually looking at the party and looking at the candidates of those that are actually presented by the National Rally as being candidates for the parliamentary elections, you could see that the problems were still there. So it's one thing to talk the talk, which is good. But at the same time, when you give nearly 100 seats to elements within your own party who are clearly problematic. I mean, we had a woman who wore a Nazi cap, like an actually cap from the Nazi area, and took a picture of herself and posted it on social media. You have Holocaust deniers. You have people who actually had a library with where they sell Holocaust denying books, and the list goes on. You can't just consider that this is just residual, that this is just a small problem. And again, I think for the party to really be taken seriously and really make sure that to know that what they're doing is genuine, they will have to have a very serious inwards-looking approach, meaning not using the issue of anti-Semitism and considering that it only exists ever on the far left, or that it only exists only with an Islamist element within the society, but actually agree and actually understand that it exists within their own ranks. Once that happens, we can take them a little bit more seriously, and we know that this will not only be part of a political strategy. In the meantime, we need to stay vigilant and call them out whenever that's necessary.
So now let's turn to the left. I have to say I used the word residual in my previous question on purpose because that was a word that Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the far-left leader, used to describe anti-Semitism in France. It's not rising, it's just residual. He's also called Israel's operation in Gaza genocide. I'm curious, should we be concerned about the far left's first place result? And I mean, what could be the ramifications of a far left victory in 2027 in the presidential election?
So we did a survey, our biannual survey that we do together with Fondapol and IFOP, one of the largest polling institutes in France. And we found that 92% of French Jews consider Jean-Luc Mélenchon's Unbowed Party to be the main reason why anti-Semitism is growing in the political sphere. So 92% of French Jews consider it to be anti-Semitic. A large majority, also 54% of French Jews, when they're being asked, is whether if Jean-Luc Mélenchon was to be president of France, would they leave the country or not? 55% say they would. So this is very, very clear. French Jews are very concerned about the far left. The different comments by himself, whether it's because he called, for example, when Jeremy Corbyn lost the election in the United Kingdom, at the time he said that the reason why he lost the elections was because of the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, or because of the networks of the Likud. He, as you said, he's spoken about a Gaza genocide, but that's happening basically every single day. He considers anti-Semitism to be residual, while knowing that 1,000% increase in anti-Semitism has happened since October 7th. He has used the issue of Gaza, of the Palestinians, really as a political game to create chaos within its parliament. He has had they have had Palestinian flags. They have called for Israel to be an apartheid state. I mean, this is basically happening every single day. So this is why Jews in France are extremely concerned and consider the far left to be the main cause of anti-Semitism today in the French political sphere. Now, what is very, very concerning, and this is we are paying the consequences today, is that when after the first round of the parliamentary elections, the traditional left-wing parties, meaning the socialists, the Green, the small Communist Party, decided to make an alliance with Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party, this was another, not only a feeling of concern for French Jews, but probably a feeling of betrayal. Because it means that the moderate left does not consider anti-Semitism to be a red line. It doesn't consider anti-Semitism to be so important for it not to create an alliance with a party that has very clearly made anti-Semitism one of its major causes. And let's be clear, in the Socialist Party, you have, for example, François Hollande, the former president of France, who was just elected in parliament again, and who has, indirectly considered that anti-Semitism is not a red line for him, and therefore has decided to create an alliance with the far left. So for French Jews, it's both a sense of fear, but also clearly a sense of betrayal. Because what is the message not only to the French left, but what is the message to the rest of society if you consider anti-Semitism not to be a red line?
I want to also look at the United Kingdom, another major country that also had elections last week. The UK Labour Party had a major victory, ending 14 years of Conservative rule. What can you tell us about that election and its results?
This is major. The Labour Party, led by Sir Keir Starmer, really scored a resounding victory in the general elections. Its majority is the largest won by any government since 1997. The party flipped seats in all corners, really, of the United Kingdom, defeating Conservative candidates in constituencies that had been Conservative since really the 19th century. The Conservative vote collapsed by nearly 20 percentage points. It's the largest decline by any governing party in British political history. And voters abandoned the party not only in favor of the Labour Party, but also for other parties, for the Liberal Democrats, for Reform UK, and also for the Green Party. And also plenty stayed at home. Fewer than 3/5 of the voters turned out to vote. And it's the second lowest turnout in the past century. Now, the Liberal Democrats took 60 seats held by the Conservatives. The party increased its representation in the House of Commons from 11 seats in 2019 to 72. And seats in which the Liberal Democrats were competing against the Conservative really saw a substantial tactical voting to oust the governing party. In the seats, the Tories voted, a share fell by an average of 24 percentage points. while that of the Liberal Democrats increased by 12. Also, the Reform Party, Eurosceptic, rather pro-Russian anti-immigration party that was led by Nigel Farage, was the biggest beneficiary of the Conservative collapse in terms of vote share. Reform achieved 14% of the vote nationwide, which is basically 12 points compared with the Brexit Party that Nigel Farage used in 2019. Nevertheless, the interesting thing, though, I think for the Labour Party in particular, is that we see to some extent that when Labour becomes a normal social democratic center-left party, it can win elections, which wasn't the case under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, where the Labour Party very, very clearly lost the elections.
But now Jeremy Corbyn, as you mentioned earlier, very troubling history of anti-Semitism that spread throughout that party. So what should we know about the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer?
Keir Starmer has made the issue of anti-Semitism a top priority. The party under Jeremy Corbyn had really become, one could say, institutionally anti-Semitic. And one of the first actions as Keir Starmer took over the party was a public apology to the Jewish community, calling anti-Semitism a stain on the party that need to be eradicated. And so I think as such, that needs to be clearly noted. Before Starmer also took over, before he now became prime minister, it's also important to note that the Jewish Labour MPs like Luciana Berger, like Louise Almond, who had left the party under Jeremy Corbyn because basically they were being harassed, have decided to come back. So I think it's really sort of an endorsement of Labour as sort of a renewed confidence in the party's election. So I think overall the Jewish community is in the United Kingdom somewhat reassured by the stance that Keir Starmer has taken since he has taken over the party, and there is no reason to believe that he will take a different stance. One should also probably note, even though this is, of course, his personal life, that Sir Keir Starmer knows the Jewish community very well. His wife is Jewish. She is the daughter of a Polish British Jew who had emigrated to the United Kingdom in the 20s, who then was married to a non-Jewish woman who then converted to Judaism. So she was brought up Jewish. She is involved in Jewish community affairs. Keir Starmer has had in the past said that he would stop working at 6 p.m. on Friday night in order to be able to be with his family for Shabbat dinner. So this is of course an important sign. There are other parties who did particularly well: the Green Party, the Reform Party, the Liberal Democrats, and there will be pressure, nevertheless, on many of the issues that, in particular, on foreign policy with relations to Israel and Gaza, that will be made. But overall, I think many in the Jewish community are reassured about the fact that the Labour Party was somehow cleansed of the most problematic anti-Semitic elements within the party.
So put this all in context for us, Simone. How do these elections fit in with what we're seeing across the continent, from the recent EU Parliament elections to the Dutch elections?
There is clearly, across the continent, a huge polarization. We see radicalization of the political spectrum. We see a certain inability for people to even talk with each other, to even share a common sense of reality. And I think this is really what we are seeing across the European continent and probably more widely across Western democracies. And this, I think, needs to be seen particularly also in a wider geopolitical point of view. We are clearly witnessing these days an assault by autocratic nations or groups across the world who have decided to team up despite their differences and to attack the Western world for their hegemony, to attack the Western world because they want to change the world order. So, of course, militarily, by the war that is being waged by Russia against Ukraine, the war that is also being waged by Iranian proxies against Israel, Hamas, of course, since October 7th, but also Hezbollah, the Houthis, et cetera, and they are really, I think, trying to test the grounds. We see those autocrats teaming up, Russia, Iran, North Korea, China to some extent, waging this war against the West. And we in the West really falling apart to some extent from within, both because there is a hybrid war that is being waged by those autocratic elements and countries from the outside, but also because we ourselves have our own huge problems, of course, as we know. And there, I think this is what we are seeing. This is also the polarization of the political spectrum. And the fact that the far right is gaining more and more ground is part of that. It's part of the fact that many European citizens feel that what they used to believe Europe was about is falling apart. There is a lot of cultural insecurity. There is a lot of fear. And to some extent, the job that by the sort of traditional conservative and liberal parties on the left and right that should have been there to address the concerns of European citizens, whether it's on immigration, whether it's on globalization, whether it's about the middle class, have not been addressed by those parties. And so in this vacuum and in this wider geopolitical context, the populist parties are exploiting that part. So my appeal to European and Western democracies and Western parties who care about Western values and European values is to start addressing the issues from within, stand up for themselves, stand up for their minorities, and in particular Jews, knowing that anti-Semitism is always the first sign of societies falling apart, and deal with the very serious threats that are coming from the outside and stand firm, because we are at a crossroad of the world as we know it.
Once again, thank you, Simone, for joining us and informing all of our conversations on these matters. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by AJC. Our producer is Atara Lakritz. Our sound engineer is TK Broderick. You can subscribe to People of the Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or learn more at ajc.org/peopleofthepod. The views and opinions of our guests don't necessarily reflect the positions of AJC. We'd love to hear your views and opinions or your questions. You can reach us at peopleofthepod@ajc.org. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to tell your friends, tag us on social media with #peopleofthepod, and hop on to Apple Podcasts to rate us and write a review to help more listeners find us. Tune in next week for another episode of People of the Pod.